State Senator Josh Stein is from Wake County, Democrat, joins us now. Also here with us tonight is WREL's Capitol Bureau Chief Laura Leslie. So glad to have you back at this table, Senator.
Thank you, David.
Very quickly, right off the top, Governor McCory said he proclaimed that his administration has been the most productive of any in the past 20 years for this first 10 months. Do you give him, how do you rate what he said?
Well, one thing to realize is productivity is not necessarily positive. You can have a productive session that ends up producing a lot of bad stuff, and that's exactly what happened this last session. This General Assembly chose to use their power with Governor McCory, not to help people, but to pursue political payback and a reckless Tea Party agenda. From the beginning to the end, they rejected health care expansion that would have helped 500,000 North Carolinians, made North Carolina the only state in the nation to reject federal benefits for people who've lost their job through no fault of their own and are looking for work. They were the ones that passed a law saying that counties and states and counties and cities can't regulate whether guns go in parks or on public school property. They were the ones that passed a law restricting a woman's ability to exercise her constitutional right to choose. They were the ones that passed a budget that cut education by $500 million. They were the ones that passed the most extreme anti-voter law that any state has passed in the last 50 years since the Voting Rights Act.
And they would tell you they were elected to do that.
I don't know that the people of North Carolina elected them to pursue this radical an agenda. What the people of North Carolina want is to have a strong economy and a positive future. And they chose to take the power that the people gave to them and use it not to help them, but to pursue this reckless agenda. And I hope that the people pay attention and that there is consequences next November and 14.
Well, let me ask this, because you're talking about, I think you're kind of conflating here the governor and the legislature, and perhaps that's intentional. But I mean, it was a legislature that came up with the bulk of this legislation and passed it.
And who signed each and every one of those bills?
In fairness, what choice did he have on most of these bills?
He could have vetoed the bills. He could have been in the mix and said, I refuse to accept that, fix this and change it, or I'll veto it. And he chose to veto two relatively minor pieces at the end of the session because he realized he'd gotten in cahoots with some people who were taking this state way to the right. We are not a red state. We're not a blue state. We're a purple state. We are a moderate, balanced state, and these guys are treating us like we're the most right-wing reactionary state in the country.
Well, let's go back to a couple of things that have fallen at his doorstep that he did not create. One, the massive problems in Health and Human Services with this new software system, this new computer system. All this was inherited by this administration. It may have been bungled by the way it has been handled, but it was inherited. And even before that, when he was talking about teachers, when Governor Perdue was there, when there was a Democratic majority in the legislature, teachers were yelling as loudly as they are today. They weren't helped the way that he says he would like to see them helped. So you have to bear some of that responsibility.
Well, remember what happened in 2009. We suffered through the worst economic collapse in 70 years.
Including the teachers suffering through it.
$4.5 billion shortfall. This year, they actually chose to spend money that we had and give that money, $500 million in tax breaks, to people whose incomes are $1 million a year. 2/3 of their tax breaks go to the wealthiest 1%. Millionaires, not millionaires in net worth, they earn $1 million. 90% go to the top 5%, people who actually made money, unlike the middle class, during the recession. So they're giving money to people who don't need it, and as a consequence, they eliminated thousands of teacher positions, they fired thousands of teacher assistants, they eliminated pay for master's teacher certificates, they cut the university budget by over $100 million again after cutting it $400 million last session. Look, it's a lot easier to blame other people than to look in the mirror, but they own this budget, and these were the choices they made.
I have a couple of clarifications. First, the $500 million is not all in 1 year. That's the cost of that tax cut over time.
No, the tax cut over 5 years is $2.5 billion. The tax cut, you're right, is $600 million over the biennium, and the tax cuts over the cuts to education were over the biennium. But it's a 2-year budget we enacted.
Right, gotcha. And I think there's been a lot of talk about going back and reconsidering that master's degree and going back and putting that pay differential back in there, because I think there were some second thoughts, or maybe some folks just didn't think this through completely.
But you remember last session they eliminated the teaching fellow program, which was a great program. There was all kinds of gnashing of teeth. Oh, we're going to revisit that. They never reinstituted it.
Let me ask this though, like you mentioned, for example, Medicaid, that he inherited it. That is true to an extent, but the administration made the decision to take that thing live on July 1st, despite warnings from Auditor Beth Wood in March that it wasn't ready to go. And so, I mean, I think to a certain extent you're right. I mean, there comes a point where you do begin to own the things that you've inherited if you decide to go forward with them.
You were at the hearing, I'm sure, the Medicaid hearing with the Secretary at the beginning of the month. It was an Alice in Wonderland experience. You had 5 providers stand up there, talk about the extreme, excruciating frustrations to get paid for services they had already provided. And then the Secretary and her computer vendors talked as if nothing was wrong. And it was the oddest thing. This has got to be fixed now. Yes, they should have tested it better before they took it live, but they now have to fix it. That's the only acceptable outcome.
There was a really pretty shocking level of disconnect between what was happening on one side of the podium and the other.
Yeah, do you sense, and this has nothing to do with this administration, but do you sense that folks nationally are feeling the exact same frustration with the Affordable Care Act now and how it's trying to be implemented, when you had an administration saying, we want it to go online, push it, get it ready, we expect it to be ready. Once you try it, you know it's going to be fraught with problems. How do we now handle those problems?
Well, here's the irony of that, and I agree with you. From everything I've read, the national rollout is not going well. This state legislature and Governor McCory rejected the option for North Carolina to have its own exchange. 16 states accepted that opportunity, and those states aren't having any problems. And it was Commissioner Wayne Goodwin said in February, folks, give me the authority. I've got the people ready to go to create this exchange. We can make this a success for the people of North Carolina. And the legislature, because they were so concerned about the ideological battle over Obamacare, that they are not looking out for the people, they were looking out for pursuing their hatred of Obamacare, and that's what we're left with. So really, this General Assembly and Governor own the mess up in Washington, because we didn't have to be in the place we're in today.
I would just add to that there is also a big difference in the fact that 3 weeks after this thing doesn't work nationally, there's all this attention to it, and people are talking about that it doesn't work and conceding that it doesn't work. The president is saying it needs to be fixed. We have not seen that level of ownership at the state level, and this is what, 4 months down the road now.
Absolutely.
And
Went
folks,
live July 1.
And folks are saying they haven't been paid for any of their Medicaid patients since July 1. They're $250,000, in arrears to some of these practices.
And we've had some of those people on this program just a couple of weeks ago. We did. What I am hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, that while there are still people caught in this squeeze and are hurting tremendously about it, there are fewer and fewer on a daily basis, that there is progress being made in correcting this. That's what I'm hearing from the vendors. Is that incorrect?
I hope that that's so. I mean, in some ways, we are prisoner to what data the department gives us, and that was what the data seemed to be indicating. And I hope that's so. I want this program to succeed. I want the computer technology to work, because providers need to be paid.
Okay, as we've got about 3 minutes left here, Senator, as you look out to the horizon, and as we enter into this new campaign season, aside from what you're hoping as far as a shift in the makeup of both the House and the Senate, what will be your priorities that you want to either address in the short session or in the coming next legislative full session?
Well, what we need to do is focus on the economy and getting it going again. Unfortunately, what this budget did was it cut funding for the Biotech Center. It eliminated funding for the Cancer Center at Chapel Hill. It cut proven economic development programs. It made all the cuts I mentioned to the universities, community colleges, pre-K, to teachers.
Did it cut them where the bleeding is severe, or did it cut them in a way of seeing if you can work better and more efficiently with the dollars you have?
Well, they eliminated funding for the cancer hospital, so I would say that's pretty severe. They cut 25% from the Biotech Center. North Carolina did not have a biotech industry 25 years ago. We now have the 3rd largest biotech hub in the nation, behind Massachusetts and California. That came because of forward-thinking elected officials realizing this was a good investment for our state. They just cut 25% of it. they're making these short-term cut because they wanted to give these tax cuts to people who frankly do not need them, the people who did well and have done well over the last 5 to 10 years. So those are fundamental choices.
Help me out there. Do you really think that's why they made the cuts? I mean, you can try to connect dots, but were there members of the legislature who said, we're going to make these cuts so we can give tax breaks here?
That was the natural consequence. It was dollar for dollar. They had a choice.
But there's a difference in a natural consequence and saying we're doing it for that reason.
To be fair, one thing we keep hearing from the governor is the reason he couldn't do teacher raises is because of the $500 million Medicaid shortfall or $600 million. This is almost the same amount of money.
It is the same amount. And we ran an amendment that said, take these tax cuts and apply it to our K-12, our pre-K, our universities and community colleges, and they voted that thing down. So they had a specific opportunity to address that imbalance, and they made the choice to give it to the people who are already doing well.
Have less than a minute. Your internal polls that you see within the party, what does that crystal ball tell you about the 2014 elections here a year out?
Nothing can tell you with any certainty. What is clear is that the people are exceedingly frustrated with the direction the Republican state government has taken North Carolina. Governor McCory and the legislature are driving North Carolina way off the road. I think what's going to happen is that there needs to be a correction, a balancing. North Carolinians like balance. And right now we have an extreme one-party state government. We need to have some balance and sanity restored to state government, and the only way we get that is to elect Democrats to the General Assembly.
We would like to hear from you. If you have something to say about tonight's discussion, tweet us. You can tweet us at twitter.com/WRAL. Email ontherecord@WRAL.com or snail mail. We'll see you again next Saturday night. Thanks for joining us.